The disappearance of Jack Abbott continued to unravel the fragile balance of power in Genoa City, and as the hours passed, the crisis began revealing uncomfortable truths about loyalty, ambition, and the dangerous rivalries that had defined the city for decades. At the center of this growing storm stood Billy Abbott, whose determination to regain control of Chancellor had suddenly taken on an entirely new level of urgency. What had once appeared to be a corporate battle now carried the weight of something far more personal. Billy knew that the demand delivered by Victor Newman was not simply about business. It was a calculated ultimatum, a move designed to force the Abbott family into a position where every decision would carry devastating consequences. If Chancellor returned to Victor's control, Billy would lose the victory he had fought so hard to secure. Yet if he refused, the cost might be Jack's life. The cruel brilliance of Victor's strategy lay in the fact that either outcome could weaken the Abbott family. As Billy continued pursuing his control of Chancellor, he could not escape the growing fear that the battle itself might have triggered the nightmare now unfolding. Somewhere far from the city, Jack himself was beginning to suspect that the truth behind his kidnapping might indeed be tied to that same conflict. Trapped in isolation, surrounded by silence and uncertainty, Jack's thoughts repeatedly returned to the bitter rivalry that had shaped so much of his life. If Victor was truly responsible, then the motive was painfully clear. But another possibility slowly began to creep into Jack's mind. What if the situation had spiraled beyond anyone's control? What if Billy's relentless pursuit of Chancellor had ignited a chain reaction that Victor was now exploiting? The thought troubled Jack deeply, not because he blamed his brother, but because he understood how easily their long war with Victor they could drag everyone they loved into its destructive orbit. Jack hoped with quiet intensity that Billy would not allow Victor to win. No matter what sacrifices were required, Jack believed the Abbott family must never surrender to the manipulation that Victor thrived on. As Jack struggled with those thoughts, frustration began to build inside the room where he was being held. The locked door in front of him had become a symbol of his helplessness, a barrier separating him from the world and from the people desperately searching for him. Finally driven by desperation and anger, Jack stepped toward the door and shouted through it, demanding that whoever was holding him listen. His voice echoed in the confined space as he proposed something simple, a deal. Jack had spent his life negotiating under pressure, and he believed that even in captivity there might still be room for bargaining. Yet the silence that followed was unsettling. There was no response, no movement, nothing to suggest that anyone was even listening. For a moment, Jack wondered if his words had vanished into emptiness. Then, without warning, the sound of metal shifting broke the stillness. The lock clicked and the door slowly opened. What Jack saw next left him completely stunned. Standing in the doorway was Patty Williams. The sight of her instantly transformed confusion into disbelief. Patty's unpredictable presence had haunted Genoa City many times before, but finding her here in the middle of this strange captivity felt almost surreal. Jack stared at her, trying to process how she could possibly be connected to his situation. When he finally managed to speak, the question that escaped him was filled with genuine confusion. He admitted he could not understand why she was there. Patty's response was as unsettling as it was calm. A faint smile crossed her face, and she assured him that she was just as pleased to see him. The warmth in her voice carried a hint of something deeper, something that made it impossible to determine whether she had come as a rescuer, a captor, or something far more complicated. While Jack faced this bizarre encounter, events back in Genoa City were moving in a direction that could determine his fate. Inside the Abbott home, Diane Jenkins Abbott was engaged in a tense discussion with Billy Kyle Abbott and Sally Spectra. Billy had suggested that they might approach Nicky Newman for help, hoping that Victor's wife might persuade him to step back from the ruthless demand he had issued. To Billy, Nicky represented one of the few people capable of influencing Victor when his schemes grew too extreme. But Diane immediately rejected the idea. She believed that bringing Nicky into the situation would only complicate things further. Victor's decisions were rarely changed by emotional appeals, and involving Nicky might simply give him another opportunity to manipulate the Abbott family. As the conversation continued, Diane's determination became increasingly clear. She listened to Billy, Kyle, and Sally as they weighed the risks, but ultimately she reached a conclusion that shocked them all. In Diane's view, the situation had reached a point where pride and strategy could no longer take priority. If Victor wanted Chancellor in exchange for Jack's freedom, then that demand might have to be met. Diane insisted that Jack's life mattered more than any corporate victory. She urged Billy to consider surrendering Chancellor, arguing that the company could be rebuilt, but a lost life could never be replaced. The suggestion carried enormous emotional weight. For Billy, the idea of handing Victor exactly what he wanted felt like a devastating defeat, one that would reinforce Victor's power and humiliate the Abbott legacy. Yet Diane's words forced everyone in the room to confront a painful truth. The battle with Victor had already escalated beyond business. It had become a struggle where human lives were being used as bargaining chips. In that moment, the fate of Chancellor, the safety of Jack, and the pride of the Abbott family were all tangled together in a decision that no one felt ready to make. Billy stood at the center of the storm, caught between his determination to resist Victor and the terrifying possibility that refusing the demand could cost his brother everything. Meanwhile, far away from Genoa City, Jack faced a mystery that was only growing deeper with Patty's strange arrival. Each side of the story was moving toward a moment where secrets would finally surface, and when that moment arrived, the consequences would reshape not only the Abbott family, but the entire balance of power in Genoa City. Tension continued to spread through Genoa City as personal conflicts began to mirror the larger power struggles unfolding across the city. Few relationships reflected that emotional strain more painfully than the complicated bond between Phyllis Summers and Daniel Romalotti Jr. Their meeting carried the weight of years of misunderstandings, betrayals, and unresolved expectations that had slowly pushed them into emotional distance. Daniel arrived with the quiet determination of someone who had spent too long watching the same patterns repeat themselves. In his eyes, the problem was no longer complicated. He believed that Phyllis had crossed too many lines and that the time had finally come for her to acknowledge the damage she had caused. From Daniel's perspective, it should not be him standing there trying to repair their relationship. It should be his mother. Daniel's frustration became even more pronounced after hearing comments from Kane Ashby suggesting that Phyllis might secretly regret the choices that had pushed her family away. According to Kane, beneath Phyllis's aggressive ambition was a woman who felt deeply alone and longed for the simple happiness she once had with the people closest to her. Daniel wanted to believe that possibility was true, but years of disappointment had made him cautious. If Phyllis truly missed the family she had fractured, then she needed to prove it with something more meaningful than words. That thought led Daniel to ask a question that immediately cut to the center of everything that had gone wrong between them. He asked whether Phyllis would really be willing to give up her pursuit of power at Newman Enterprises if it meant restoring the peace and connection their family once shared. The question lingered in the air like a challenge. For Daniel, it was not only about business ambition. It was about priorities. He wanted to know if power still mattered more to his mother than the people who loved her. Phyllis's reaction revealed just how deeply she resented the expectations placed upon her. She could not understand why she should be the one expected to sacrifice everything while the powerful men of Genoa City continued to pursue influence and control without apology. In her mind, the double standard was impossible to ignore. Men in the city built empires, manipulated corporations, and pursued ambition relentlessly, yet no one demanded they abandon those goals in order to prove their love for their families. The idea that she alone should step aside and surrender what she had fought to achieve felt unfair and insulting. Phyllis argued that she should not have to choose between power and family, when men were rarely asked to make that same choice. Her voice carried both defiance and exhaustion, revealing a woman who was tired of being judged for the same traits that made powerful men respected. The conversation quickly reached a painful standstill. Daniel, sensing that they were once again drifting toward another argument without resolution, decided to leave before the tension escalated further. For a moment, it seemed as though the meeting would end the same way so many of their previous confrontations had ended, with distance and disappointment. But just as Daniel prepared to walk away, Phyllis stopped him. Something in her expression softened slightly, suggesting that despite her stubborn pride, she was not ready to let the moment slip away completely. She suggested they change the subject and talk about something less heavy. Instead of continuing to argue about ambition and sacrifice, Phyllis proposed something simple and surprisingly ordinary. She invited Daniel to go for a walk and grab coffee together, hoping the change of atmosphere might help them clear their minds and remember the parts of their relationship that had once been easy and genuine. For a brief moment, the possibility of reconciliation seemed within reach. Yet peace in Genoa City rarely lasted long. Before the conversation could shift into something calmer, the quiet setting was suddenly interrupted when Billy Abbott arrived, accompanied by Kyle Abbott and Diane Jenkins Abbott. Their sudden appearance instantly changed the emotional atmosphere. Phyllis's expression hardened with irritation. She had finally begun to reach a fragile moment of understanding with her son, and now the intrusion threatened to derail it completely. To Phyllis, the interruption felt disrespectful. The fragile attempt to repair her family relationship had been interrupted by yet another crisis connected to the Abbott family. Despite her annoyance, Phyllis could see the urgency in Billy's face. His presence was not casual, and whatever he wanted to discuss clearly carried significant importance. Reluctantly, she agreed to hear him out when he asked for a private conversation. The request only increased her suspicion that something serious was unfolding behind the scenes. Still, the timing of Billy's arrival left her deeply frustrated. He had stepped directly into a moment that might have helped repair the broken trust between her and Daniel. Because of that intrusion, Phyllis made it clear that whatever Billy wanted had better justify the disruption. If he had interrupted her attempt to reconnect with her family, then the matter he brought with him needed to be important enough to make that sacrifice worthwhile. Beneath her sharp words, however, there remained a flicker of curiosity. In Genoa City, unexpected interruptions often signal the beginning of events that could change everything.